So this is our webinar, the second webinar of the week for Awareness Week. This is the Anatomy and Physiology of the Digestive Tract webinar. My name is Brittney Riley. I'm the Public Relations Director. I'm 28 years old. I got diagnosed with gastroparesis when I was 25. I'm originally from Lincoln, Nebraska, but I live in Roland, Iowa right now. I'm finishing my last year of veterinary school. That's me, if you don't know what I look like, if you're not a friend of mine on Facebook. Some people mistake me for the Energizer Bunny because I'm always doing something, but in reality I'm usually kind of really low on energy, but I try to stay as busy as possible. So you might be wondering, what do I know? I have a Bachelor's of Science in Veterinary and Biomedical Sciences with a minor in Biochemistry. As I said, I'm in my 4th year of veterinary school, and our first year we had 32 weeks of anatomy training. We learned the dog, cat, horse, cow, sheep, pig, and chicken all in a year. And I also really like comparative anatomy, so I'm good with human anatomy as well. So we're going to start off with the mouth, the oropharynx, and the esophagus. You guys should all know what the inside of your mouth looks like. Some of you guys might not have the tonsils. And let's see. So you guys all know what that looks like. So anatomists consider the mouth part of the digestive tract. Some people don't really realize that. That's always wonder why my GI doctor never asked me about my teeth, because mastication, which is the art of chewing, is the first step in that digestive process, which is why even with us that may not be eating right now, oral hygiene is very important. Humans have 32 teeth. Dogs have 42 teeth. This is just an overview slide just to make you think a little bit. Saliva, it has several functions. One is antibacterial. IgA is an antibody that's also secreted in your respiratory tract and digestive tract on the surface and is the first line of defense. Lactoferrin is a enzyme that traps iron and keeps it away from bacteria which need it to grow. Lysozyme is a enzyme that breaks apart cells and proteins, and it's actually in your tears as well. There's two enzymes in saliva, amylase and lipase. Both of those are also pancreatic enzymes. Amylase breaks down carbohydrates, and if you've ever had a cracker in your mouth and let it dissolve, it starts to taste sweet, and that's actually the amylase breaking it down into sugar. So a fun fact of the night, the first one, you'll get a lot of them. Humans produce about 1.5 liters of saliva a day. If you're a cow, you produce about 70 liters every day. So thankfully you don't do that, because that would be a lot of venting out of G-tubes. There are a lot of salivary glands the humans have, submandibular, parotid, and sublingual. They all enter pretty much underneath the tongue. The image on the screen is actually the sublingual salivary gland. That's what it looks like under a microscope. It was biopsied and stained as a special stain. The tongue's a unique organ. It's about 4 external muscles that actually control it and 4 internal. It's unique in the fact that the muscles are organized in 3 different ways: transverse, longitudinal, and vertical. This is what it looks like under the microscope, and you can see that the fibers are going in several different directions. If you ever wondered why people call muscle skeletal muscle striated muscle, if you look really closely, there's lots of different lines on those, and that's the striations. This is an okapi, and this is the tongue muscles in actions. Looking at its eye right there, I think. Now the oropharynx is the back part of the mouth. Little kids well, even doctors call the uvula a thingamabob. So it basically goes from the uvula to the esophagus. Dysphagia is a difficulty swallowing. You've probably heard that term before. It can result from either oropharyngeal dysfunction, which is in the mouth, or because of esophageal dysmotility. And it takes about 50 muscles working together to be able to take a bite of food, chew it, and then swallow it. So it's a very complex method. The epiglottis is what seals the trachea when we swallow, protects our airway. As my mother said, it always prevents things from going down the wrong tube. When I was told when I was younger that something went down the wrong tube, it was either a liquid going down the wrong tube. I thought there was a tube for liquid and a tube for food. It took me a long time to figure out there's only one. So the esophagus is up to 25 centimeters long. Goes from the back of the throat through the chest cavity, through the diaphragm, into the stomach. The esophagus consists of 4 layers. You can read those: mucosa, submucosa, muscularis propria, and adventitia. In, I guess, histology, which is microscopic anatomy, you can see these layers. Further on the digestive tract, you also get a serosal layer, and since the esophagus lacks that, when you do surgical procedures and suture it back together, it doesn't heal quite as fast and nicely as other organs would because it's lacking that layer. You'll notice the humans, if you look at the upper third of the esophagus is skeletal muscle, middle third is both skeletal and smooth muscle, and the lower third of the esophagus is smooth muscle. And the human body has 3 types of muscle: skeletal, cardiac, and smooth muscle. Smooth muscle is what makes up the digestive tract muscles. A little fact, since I told you I like comparative anatomy, dogs, their entire length of the esophagus is skeletal muscle and striated muscle, and cats, the top 2/3 is skeletal muscle, and the lower 1/3 is smooth muscle, which is why dogs can vomit very easily compared to cats. I really like histology, and I figure you guys might be a little squeamish if I showed you any actual pictures of the organs. So I did a lot of histology slides in the talk. The esophagus is on the left. You can see that it has a lot of muscle surrounding it, which is the first layer going into it, and the inside layer is the lumen. The clear part in the middle is the mucosal surface. What's next to it is the trachea, and you can see, if you look closely, there's a ring of a tannish color, and then for about 3/4 of it, and then there's just a red band going to the other, and that's actually just showing you the cartilage and then the muscle that keeps the trachea together. Label's gone wild. This is just a gee whiz. If you have the PowerPoint slideshow after, when I post it, you can look at it and learn a little bit more. You can just see the muscle layers and the stratified squamous epithelium, which is towards the clear side in the middle of the lumen. We'll talk about epithelial cells in a little bit. You guys probably heard about the esophageal sphincter. There's 2 of them, an upper and a lower. The lower is the cardiac sphincter. It's located where the esophagus enters the stomach. And there's actually 2 muscle layers that regulate the opening. One actually comes from the diaphragm, and the other is a smooth muscle inside the esophagus. This is just a picture. If you're curious about the terminology, esophageal frenico, or freno, is actually diaphragm in Latin. Some of us have gastroesophageal reflux disease. That's actually failure of the lower esophageal sphincter. Some people have silent GERD, like my grandmother, and some don't. Some have a lot of heartburn. Either way, it can cause erosive esophagitis, esophageal stricture, which my grandma actually has, and then can trigger asthma or sinusitis in susceptible patients, and I'm one of those. Achalasia is a esophageal motility disorder. It's actually caused by the dysfunction of the lower esophageal sphincter to relax and let food into the stomach. And the distal esophagus is closest to the stomach. In anatomy, you can also call it aboral because it's away from the mouth. And you can see the incidence is 1 out of 100,000 people a year are diagnosed with it. So actually getting to the stomach, the general anatomy, if you look at it, there's the cardia, the fundus, the body, the antrum, and the pylorus. And then the pylorus empties into the duodenum, which is the first part of the small intestine. The landmarks, as I said, they're divided into 4 distinct sections, like I said. The cardia is the portion of the stomach immediately below the esophagus. And anatomists define the cardia starting as where the stratified squamous epithelium changes to the columnar epithelium of the stomach. You may be asking, squamous what? That's actually a term histologists use to describe the cells on top of different layers, mucosal layers that protect it. So they're squamous, which is like in the esophagus and on your skin. On your skin it's keratinized, which gives it a little stronger, I guess, integrity. Columnar is the GI tract. Cuboidal is in the thyroid and sweat glands. And transitional cells is in the bladder and ureters. So getting back to the stomach, the fundus is to the left and above the cardia. It's supposed to relax and store food after eating for a short period for about 1 hour. There's thinking that failure of the fundus to relax or fundic accommodation can contribute to gastroparesis and functional dyspepsia. Special tertiary centers can actually do imaging to figure out how the fundus is relaxing, and it's used the same as gastric emptying studies. It's the same mode of nuclear medicine doing that. The body of the stomach is the area between the cardia and the fundus and the pylorus. So if you look at it, it's right in the middle. There's 2 lines kind of showing you where the pyloric antrum starts and the fundus. Lesser curvature and greater curvatures. At the very end, I'll talk about a little bit about arteries, just for 1 slide, so you don't have to freak out on them and go too long. But the gastric arteries actually go along the lesser curvature and the greater curvature of the stomach. So when they put in a G-tube, they miss both of those and just put it in the body of the stomach where it's avascular, so there's no vascular supply that they can disrupt. The pylorus, which we should all know about, is the distal portion of the stomach. It connects to the duodenum. It's made up of the antrum and the pyloric canal. At the end is the pyloric sphincter. And when you eat, your stomach's supposed to grind down food till it's 1 to 2 millimeters in size, which is about the size of a pinhead. And at that size, it can go through the pyloric sphincter. If it's not that size, it doesn't go through until later in the fasted states, motility. So if you're a goat, back to our comparative anatomy, this is what your stomach would look like. You hear a goat or cow has 4 stomachs. You have the rumen, the reticulum, the omasum, and the abomasum. What you should get out of this is, if anyone's talking to you about a cow's stomach, tell them that the abomasum is the true stomach. The other ones are just rumination vats. So back to the layers. In the stomach, there's several different layers of muscle, which are important for the grinding function the stomach has. So the outer, the middle, and the inner. And they go in different directions, so the stomach can grind in different ways. So the mucosa, which is underneath the epithelium, is composed of different things in different regions. So the cardia has mucus glands. The fundus has isthmus, which contains mucus glands. The neck has parietal cells. The base has chief cells and enteroendocrine cells. And the pylorus has mucus cells and G cells. So we said glands, parietal glands and such. A gland is a specialized group of cells that secrete a substance used elsewhere in the body. It can be endocrine, like the pancreas is secreting insulin, or exocrine, like the pancreas is secreting digestive enzymes like lipase, amylase, trypsin, and chymotrypsin. You have the salivary glands, which produce saliva. I have a pet peeve, and you doctors probably have the same pet peeve, is lymph nodes are not actually glands. So when most people go in and say, oh, I have a cold, my glands are swollen, they're talking about the lymph nodes. So You can use the correct terminology and make your doctor think you're smart. So a fun fact, the liver is the largest gland in the body. Most people don't think of it as a gland, but the liver has a lot of different functions, and veterinary students and medical students all like to attempt to list all the functions of the liver. I've never gotten past 50. There's actually 500 different functions of the liver, varying from producing bile to being an organ that does gluconeogenesis, that kicks out glucose when your blood glucose is getting too low when you haven't eaten. So the specialized cells I mentioned earlier, chief cells secrete pepsinogen, and that is an enzyme that breaks down proteins. Parietal cells secrete hydrochloric acid and intrinsic factor. Intrinsic factor is what binds vitamin B12, and if you lack it, it causes a type of anemia. Mucus cells secrete mucus, obviously. And enteroendocrine cells produce gastrin, ghrelin, somatostatin. Ghrelin is actually a focus of some research right now for gastric dysmotility, seeing if it can be used to increase motility in patients with gastroparesis. I haven't done too much reading recently. There is some trials going on that looks like it might be promising, because ghrelin functions to actually speed up the stomach. Going back to histology, this is the stomach. The gastric pits are where actually the specialized cells are located. The parietal cell is what secretes the hydrochloric acid. So if you take a proton pump inhibitor like Prilosec, Nexium, Acethex, Prevacid, Protonix, it all works on the parietal cells, inhibit what's called the hydrogen potassium ATPase, or the protein pump, that actually kicks the hydrogen ion out, which combines with the chloride in your stomach to produce the stomach acid. So proton pump inhibitors just inhibit it from kicking out that hydrogen ion, so you don't have such acidic stomachs. So as we know, the function of the stomach is to store food, to mix the contents, and to grind the food particles to the appropriate size. So you ask, how does this do that? The work is shared by the two regions of the stomach, the fundus and the upper body. Those actually serve to create a low frequency, strong contractions that create a gradient that helps push the food towards the pylorus. The lower body, the antrum of the pylorus, is actually what creates a peristaltic wave that helps grind the food. It makes these waves in health every 3 times a minute, in people and in dogs 5 to 6 times a minute. So now that it's mixed and grinded, what happens now? So as I said before, the particles have to be 1 to 2 millimeters in size to go through the pylorus. Larger food particles are refluxed back into the body of the stomach if they reach the pyloric sphincter too soon. So larger food has to go back through the process again, and how it's supposed to work is that larger food gets ground down, finally small enough to pass through the pyloric sphincter. So you ask, what about things that kids swallow that aren't digestible, like a penny? You know they all come out the other end, so how does it get that way? And if you're on Facebook, you know that my avatar right now is actually the "Have you thanked your migrating motor complex today?" which is my geeky way of saying I'm getting awareness gastroparesis to all my classmates. The migrating motor complex, I call it the magical broom of the gastrointestinal tract, because it actually functions when your stomach is supposedly empty in the fasted state to clear any debris in the stomach that didn't get small enough to go in through the pylorus during the fed state. So there's 3 real stages and the 4th stage, which is a transition stage. The quiet period of little activity is 45 minutes to 60 minutes long, followed by 30 minutes of stronger and increasing frequency of contractions. This is when your stomach might start to growl, and the 5 to 15 minutes of period of rapid, evenly spaced contractions, is when your stomach really growls if you hear it, and this is what actually functions to push that penny through the pyloric sphincter into the duodenum. And now that we're talking about the duodenum, we're going to go to the small intestines and pancreas and liver a little bit. So the small intestine is about 20 feet long. The duodenum is supposedly 25 centimeters, 12 inches long. Jejunum is about 14 feet long. The jejunum, depends on how you want to say it, is that long because it's what absorbs the nutrients. So it has to be long enough to give enough surface area to absorb all the nutrients before it gets to the ileum, which is the last part of the intestine. In humans, it's said to be 5 feet long. In dogs and cats, it's much shorter, and the anti-mesenteric artery is what actually tells us as veterinarians where the ileum is in a dog or a cat. So if you like to learn visually, you can see where the duodenum is, the jejunum, and the ileum. So we talked about layers before, and I didn't have a good picture of the layers in the small intestine, so we'll just pretend that's it. That's just a review slide. When I was talking about in the jejunum, the increased surface areas, the villi, you can see the tall cylindrical villi, makes little fingers into the small intestine's lumen, and that is like a large surface area for things to be absorbed on. If you think about it, you put a large ice cube in a glass of water, it takes a lot longer to melt than if you put a lot of little ice cubes in it, because a lot of little ice cubes have a lot more surface area than a large ice cube does, so it's in contact with the warmer water, it melts quicker. So that's the kind of the concept of surface area. There's two ducts, the pancreatic duct and the bile duct, that open up into the ascending duodenum about 10 centimeters from the pylorus. The pancreatic duct allows bicarbonate and the lipase, amylase, and the proteases to enter the small intestine to aid in digestion. The bile duct empties the bile into the small intestine and aids in the digestion of fat. We'll talk about this a little bit later. Some of you may have or know of sphincter of Oddi dysfunction, and that's actually the dysfunction of the sphincter that controls the opening of the bile duct where it enters the duodenum. And this can be caused by stenosis, which is narrowing, like the young kids have pyloric stenosis that causes them to vomit like they would have gastroparesis. Same similar thing is just narrower. Or dyskinesia, which is dysfunction, dysmovement. So those are two main causes, and there's various ways of diagnosing it. I may talk about it later in a different webinar, or a GI specialist might be able to do it for us. So now that everything's in the duodenum, now what happens? Chyme is what we call food that's gone into the stomach and empties to the duodenum. So it goes to the pyloric sphincter into the proximal duodenum. Proximal means close to the origin. That's a fancy medical word. So basically the best way to think about it is your elbow is more proximal to the shoulder compared to the wrist. So once the chyme gets into the duodenum, it's really acidic, because if you think about the hydrochloric acid in your stomach has a pH of about 2, which may not mean anything to you guys, but that's really acidic. This acidity interferes with the digestive process because it interferes with enzymes that the pancreas secretes. So the body has a way of doing this. This first enzyme actually, well, the first hormone actually identified in people with secretin is produced by the S cells in the duodenum and the lips of lubricant. It kind of responds to the change in pH and helps stimulate the pancreas to secrete bicarbonate, which neutralizes the acid in the chyme and raises the pH. Bicarbonate's basically baking soda, and it's kind of acting like you would if you put baking soda and vinegar. Neutralizing the baking soda causes a reaction. So if you think about this, we'll do a little pharmacology. All of us has probably taken Tums at some point. You may have wondered how Tums work and why you belch after you take Tums. So there's a chemical equation on here that says calcium carbonate, which is Tums, plus 2 hydrochloric acids, ends up producing calcium chloride, carbon dioxide, and water. So the carbon dioxide is what you belch after you take Tums. So I guess if your son or daughter asks why, you have the answer now. And since we're on chemistry, we can go to the pancreatic enzymes right now. They help in digestion of protein, fat, and starch. The enzymes originate in the exocrine secretory acini of the pancreas. And a lovely, beautiful histology slide again. The island of Langerhans is actually where insulin is produced in glucagon. If you're diabetic, you know all about those. The exocrine secretory acini are the rest of the pancreas, and that's what it looks like on the microscope. I think it's kind of pretty. So a zymogen is a precursor to an enzyme. Trypsinogen and chymotrypsin are 2 zymogens produced by the pancreas that are secreted into the duodenum. And then enterokinase, which is another enzyme, converts it into trypsin and chymotrypsin in the duodenum, and it breaks down protein. You can kind of see that in the little diagram below. Amylase, as I said in the saliva, is also secreted by the pancreas. It breaks down starch into maltose. Maltose is a glucose-glucose disaccharide. That's what it looks like. It's 2 glucose molecules connected together. Pancreatic lipase is what breaks down fat in the intestine. It requires the adequate bile salt concentrations to work, so your liver has to be functioning correctly for you to break down fat correctly, which is why sometimes when you have your gallbladder removed, you get more issues with diarrhea because you're not absorbing fat as well. So going to bile, the liver secretes the bile. Hepatic cells, which are liver cells, produce bile, and it's composed of several different types of bile acids, which I will spare you the biochemistry of that. The bile is secreted into the bile ducts, which lead to the hepatic duct, which joins the cystic duct that goes to the gallbladder. Sounds like the knee bone is connected to the thigh bone. The hepatic duct connects to the cystic duct. The cystic duct and the hepatic duct connect and form the common bile duct. So the gallbladder functions to store bile until cholecystokinin is secreted and stimulates it to contract. If any of you have had a HIDA scan, that's what they inject into you to cause your gallbladder to contract. The common bile duct enters the duodenum, which is how the bile gets there. In case you're wondering, this is what the gallbladder looks like under the microscope. A fast fact that I didn't include on the slide is the rat and the horse do not have a gallbladder, which I find amazing, and it's a really tricky question for an anatomist, veterinary anatomist, to ask vet students is to locate the gallbladder in a horse, because it's not there. As I said, I'll spare you the details on the bile acids. The circular structure in the thing with the lipid in the middle is called the mycele. Soap actually forms those as well. So the bile acids form those structures and increases surface area for the lipase to work to break down the fat. So in review, that was really quick. The chyme is neutralized by bicarbonate. The bile acids form myceles to help pancreatic lipase to break down the fat. Amylase made something called maltose, which, as we said, was 2 glucose molecules stuck together. And the trypsin and chymotrypsin break down protein into short chains of amino acids. So now what? Once all these take place, the small intestine peristalsis moves the chyme from the duodenum to the jejunum so absorption can take place. I said the villi increase the surface area for absorption. So how are the nutrients absorbed? It's magic. We'll leave it at that today. It's a very complicated process, and I don't have time to go through it today because we have to get past the jejunum farther down in the digestive tract. So, and on a Harry Potter theme, the defense against the dark arts, gastrointestinal style, the really dark purple splotches called the lymphatic nodules or Pyrus patches are actually lymph tissue like lymph nodes inside the ileum. to help protect you from any bacteria that you may have ingested that got past the stomach's acidic nature that would have killed most of them. Really cool thing in anatomy lab first year, we found a dog that actually had Peyer's patches in the duodenum, which we thought was amazing. We actually took a piece of it over to the diagnostic lab to make a slide so we could prove that's what it was. So a lot of you may have J tubes. It's placed past the ligamented shreds. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. I've never heard it before, which is the anatomic feature that divides the duodenum from the jejunum. When they do a GJ tube or nasal jejunal tube, they have to get past that ligament. Otherwise, it's more prone to refluxing back into the stomach. It's actually not a ligament. It's a band of skeletal muscle connected to smooth muscle. A ligament, is, in the anatomical sense, connects bone to bone, like your ankle. So getting into the large intestine, the function, as we know, is to reabsorb water from the ingesta. And for those of us that have constipation issues, the longer the stool remains there, the drier it gets. Goblet cells in large intestine secrete mucus that lubricates the stool as it travels through the colon. Goblet cells use both an apocrine and americrine method to produce mucus. I'd be denying you a fun fact if I didn't tell you all this. If you look, I have the americrine, apocrine, and holocrine, different types of endocrine secretions. Americrine are done by exocytosis, so the cell stays intact. Apocrine, actually, little parts of the cell break off and float away. And holocrine, the whole cell dissolves. If you've had cow's milk or goat's milk, you might notice it tastes completely different. Part of it's because cows are produced one way and goat's milks are produced the other way. I've never had goat milk, so I can't say much about it, but I do know from infectious disease that they have a lot more white blood cells in their milk. So mucus production is done in the crypts. You can see it from the diagram. The clear circles in those crypts are actually the goblet cells, which produce the mucus. And so our motto is, the stomach, small intestine, and the colon all have similar layers. So the first part of the large intestine is the cecum. Chyme enters the colon by the way of the ileocecal valve. That is where the ileum connects to the cecum. It's a valve. When you have a colonoscopy, the gastroenterologist is actually supposed to go all the way until he can see the ileocecal valve and get through it if he possibly can, so that way he knows he's gotten the entire large intestine. The cecum is actually a pouch. In animals, the size and number of ceca differ. Birds have 2 ceca, some don't have any. The horse has a really large cecum that ferments the forage they eat. It produces like the large rumen in the cow that ferments the hay or grass the cow eats. The appendix is actually a blind-ended tube that connects to the cecum. Most people think it has no function. Some scientists right now believe that it stores the natural flora of our colon, so the good bacteria in our colon. And so if we do a procedure like a colonoscopy or get a bad case of diarrhea that flushes everything out of your colon, or you take antibiotics, it can serve as a reservoir to repopulate with the good bacteria. The ascending colon extends from the cecum to the hepatic flexure. That's about 1 foot long. The hepatic flexure is where it turns from going vertical up your body towards your head, under the liver to go across your stomach. It receives the liquid stool from the small intestine. By the time it gets there, 90% of the water and nutrients have already been absorbed. That is why if you have diarrhea of small bowel origin, it's actually a lot more liquid compared to if it was just from a large bowel, from say Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis. This is a diagram that shows you where the cecum is and the ascending colon. The transverse colon extends from the hepatic flexure to the splenic flexure. It's mobile. It's the only part of the colon that's actually mobile. The rest of it is attached by mesentery to the body wall. So it serves to remove the remaining moisture from the chyme and mix it with mucus and microflora. When you get gas pains, which I get sometimes under my right rib cage, it's really painful, and a lot of times that's gas pockets getting caught under the rib cage in the hepatic or the splenic flexure. Not much you can do about it other than maybe I usually find a heating pad to help. So the last part of the colon is the descending colon. It extends from the splenic flexure to the sigmoid colon. It functions to store the stool until it's passed. The sigmoid colon is actually the kind of S shape it makes with the bottom going towards the rectum. It's very muscular, and which allows it to contract and produce the stool into the rectum. The rectum is about 12 centimeters or 5 inches long. It's the last portion of the large intestine, which I think we all know. And I think we're almost to the end now. I didn't talk much about the blood supply to the digestive tract because I figured you guys probably weren't too interested in it. Some of you may know of superior mesenteric artery syndrome, which is one of the main branches of the aorta coming off to feed the intestinal tract. The colic arteries and the inferior pancreaduodenal artery come off of that. When you lose a lot of weight, there's less fat in your stomach, in your abdominal cavity, so that artery can actually press on the small intestine and produce a mechanical blockage that can be mistaken for gastroparesis. There's also the inferior mesenteric artery, which does the left colic artery. Celiac trunk is feeds the stomach, the spleen, and the liver. So, let's see. And I didn't talk too much about motility of the intestinal tract. It's kind of complex. I don't think I had significant time to explain it well enough for you to understand. It's similar to what the stomach does, except for there's oral and aboral parts of it, so part of it goes back and forth. That's a little more complex. So if I get a chance sometime on a off rotation, I may write up a PowerPoint slideshow to post for you guys to learn about it at a later date. So these are my references. This reference from Colorado State, the one that's in blue, is actually a really good reference for just about anything you want to know about the digestive tract. And the histology photos are actually done by Dr. Georgie, who was my histology professor in undergrad and also my medical terminology professor in vet school. Ah, hit the wrong button. This is actually what the website looks like. If I can get it to close. There we go. So if you have questions, if you have a microphone, I can turn it on for you. Otherwise, you can submit them in the question box, and I will answer them that way. Okay, Thomas, do you have a question? Okay, you can type the question. Yeah, I actually have a copy in my Dropbox of the presentation in PowerPoint format, as well as a PDF file that I can post later on our fan page. The question was if we can download the presentation afterwards, and I was planning on posting it right when I'm done. Does anyone else have a question? Okay, so the question is, what causes patients with gastroparesis to eructate, which is the fancy word of saying burp, so much more than other people? There's several reasons for that. Some of it can be that some of our food that we eat sits in the stomach longer, and actually as it gets digested it kind of ferments like it would in the cow's rumen and build up some byproduct, which would be gas, which you would belch. Also, a lot of times people, when they're a little bit nauseous, tend to get aerophagic or swallow a little bit more air than normal, and then they burp it up that because of that. Otherwise, those are the two main things that I know about right off the top of my head. Okay. Do you have any other questions? The question is, was the webinar recorded? It was, and I will post that as soon as I get it edited a little bit. See, it looks like we have several questions I need to answer. If I can find my question box, it went away from me. There we go. Okay, so I have a question about, one question was to get pain from acid reflux, yet the endoscopy showed no acid. I'm not sure if you're saying that it showed no gross features of acid damage. If that is the case, a lot of times chronic damage from over-acidic stomach and in the esophagus isn't actually apparent to the naked eye, and they have to do biopsies to see if it's there. If the biopsy didn't show any ulcerations or alterations in the cells, there's other causes of stomach pain. Acid reflux sometimes can be caused by too little acid, which is kind of counterintuitive sometimes. Let's see. What causes all the bloat? There's several reasons for bloat. One is in the stomach, as I said, the digestive that you would eat can ferment and cause gas, and if you don't eructate it out, it can stay there and make you bloat up more. Further on the digestive tract in the small bowel, if some of the food wasn't broken down properly, it can also cause the bacteria that would be in the large bowel to digest that material and produce gas and cause bloat from the large bowel. And if you have small bowel bacteria overgrowth, the bacteria in there as well could feed on both food that wasn't digested properly and food that you had eaten that was digested properly and produce the same gas and have it build up. And since we have dysmotility in our stomachs and in our intestines, the gas really doesn't have a good place to go, so it just stays there and causes the bloat until it finally starts moving on and we can get rid of it. It's either A, passed as flatulence or eructated out, or is absorbed slowly through the bowel wall and dissipates that way. In layman terms, what is gastroparesis? Basically, it's either the dysfunction of the muscle layers of the stomach, or a dysfunction of the nerve that gives signals to the muscles of the stomach to cause it to contract and do the peristaltic waves that we need in the fed state that I talked, that helps push the food that has been grind down through the pyloric sphincter, or also in the fasted state prevents the migrating motor complex to actually function correctly and push whatever food that's left in the stomach out through the pyloric sphincter. So basically, as it broken down, stomach paralysis is basically what it is in layman's terms. It just has to do with the muscle and nerve damage. You guys have good questions. Okay, any other questions? Oh, looks like I have one more. Should we be able to digest food better while we're awake or while we're asleep? That's a good question. I guess it depends on your level of dysmotility in your small intestine and in your stomach. The process of digestion will normally take place no matter if you're awake or asleep normally. In patients with dysmotility, sometimes walking around would actually get the food to move better into the small intestine and move through the small intestine in the jejunum so that it gets to the areas where the surface area is larger to be absorbed. So in that case, while you're awake would be better. It's also when you're asleep, laying down, gravity isn't assisting emptying of your stomach, so it wouldn't empty as well that way. So it depends on the level of dysmotility, but in a normal person, it really doesn't matter. Okay, so the clarification of my explanation of gastroparesis. So the question was to understand damage to the stomach muscle and to the stomach nerve is different, but can both cause gastroparesis. That is correct. It can be both. You could have damage to both the muscle and the nerves causing it, or it could be the muscle that's not responding to the nerve impulse correctly, or it could be the nerve not giving the muscle the correct information for it to function correctly. So that's basically how it works. Okay, so why would someone who is too fed, who's getting a calorically dense formula that has all the vitamins it needs in it, still have deficiencies? And well, it depends a lot on how you're actually absorbing the nutrients. If you're having any trouble with fat absorption, that can cause you to malabsorb vitamin A, E, D, and K, which are all the fat-soluble vitamins. So those have to go through the small intestinal wall with the broken down fat. So if your pancreas isn't working correctly to break down fat, your liver's not working correctly to produce the bile acids, that can cause a problem. It also depends on where, if you have a J tube and it's further down in the digestive tract, sometimes that can actually bypass a lot of the area where the bile and the pancreatic enzymes get pushed in, and sometimes the stimulus doesn't allow it to produce the same amount of enzymes as it normally would, which would also cause malabsorption. Okay, so I have a question about bezoars. How careful does one with GP have to be with the particle-sized fiber and pureed fruits and veggies? It depends on how bad your gastric motility is. As we talked about, there is the migrating motor complex, which should be the cleanup crew for the stomach. Normally, it's caused by larger fiber particles than what you find in pureed fruit and veggies. It'd be more like eating yogurt with berry pieces in it that could cause more of a problem, or eating, carrots that aren't cooked well, or things like green beans, apple peels, potato skins that we all know to avoid, that would cause it. I don't know the frequency of them in patients with gastroparesis. I haven't seen any of the incidence or prevalence data. So it's kind of an interesting phenomenon. Okay, so I guess the question goes back to if between the muscle and nerve function causing gastroparesis, do they need to identify what's not working to be able to treat it? Right now, with treatment of gastroparesis, there really isn't anything that would make your stomach listen to the nerves better or make the nerves function better to get the stomach to work muscle to work better. It is kind of handy to know if it is a nerve problem, because maybe you'll develop other nerve issues, for like autonomic dysfunction later on, or if it's a muscle problem, that could be a manifestation of mitochondrial disease or a lipid storage disease or something like that. I think if they figure out how to treat something like a nerve dysfunction or the muscle dysfunction, then knowing the cause will be much better, much easier, and the best thing to do. I don't know about the question I have right now is research for DTP using stem cells. I haven't read of any, and I'm pretty caught up on my literature right now. Question about diabetic gastroparesis. Is it more likely to have nerve damage due to high sugars? Yes. Diabetic gastroparesis is usually caused by hyperglycemia, so high blood glucose levels, causing kind of interesting. The high blood sugar actually bathes the nerves a little bit more and causes a influx of water to some of them and causes damage to the nerves. Oh, Chris had just informed me that there's some studies with stem cells that Dr. Koch is actually working on, which I haven't read yet. It's interesting. Okay. Okay. So the question is to know if you are digesting and getting enough nutrients. A regular blood test could detect any deficiencies. A lot of the blood tests can check for deficiencies. Most of those are looking at deficiencies in the circulation of the bloodstream and not in the tissue itself. So it is possible to have a high enough level of, let's say, carnitine, which is one they usually don't test, in the blood, but be deficient in other tissues like the heart and the skeletal muscles. So most of the time you can get a good feel if there's any deficiencies, but sometimes you can't. It's like doing hemoglobin and ferritin. One says one thing, one says the other thing, the stores, and one says what's actually in the circulation right now. Okay. I'm going to refer, the question is, I was curious about eating pureed squash and pumpkin. I'm going to refer to a dietitian on that. Some patients can tolerate it, some patients can't. And that's that. I apologize. Someone's actually at my door. It's kind of distracting me a minute. Okay. Okay, so I have a question on what a colon transit study is. They can do it two ways, a SITS marker test and a nuclear medicine test, and I'm actually doing a talk tomorrow night on diagnostic rate imaging of the gastrointestinal tract. which I'm actually addressing the whole transit studies they do at places like Temple and Mayo. So you can either attend the webinar tomorrow night, or I'll have the PowerPoint posted later and the recording of it. Question is, gastroparesis could be due to an autonomic nervous system issue, and that is correct. Oh, a question is, I guess the question was, why do they say gastroparesis could be an autonomic issue? It's because the autonomic nervous system is actually what regulates the function of the gastrointestinal tract. The autonomic peripheral nervous system is what does the muscles and your sensory of your hands and fingers, so you can touch and feel. Autonomic is what controls the heart rate, the stomach, bladder, blood pressure, things like that. So a dysfunction in the autonomic nervous system can cause gastroparesis. I think that actually might be all the questions. And we're actually right at 8 o'clock right now, so I'm going to just go through a little bit of rest of other events for DTP Awareness Week. The Kids Art Contest, we're going to use the winning work for a 2012 calendar if we get enough submissions. So if you have any children or friends, or if you're a teenager listening to this and want to draw, that would be great. The True Story Contest, the kind of humorous stories that happen, is also available. Sorry, I'm getting tired. Poetry Contest, winners receive a free copy of the G-PACT book, but all entries will be put in the book. They're all due the 28th or midnight on the 27th, and can be submitted to public relations at gpact.org. If you're doing a canned food drive, let us know so we can announce it. If you haven't got brochures, you may be able to get them by this weekend if you contact Carol at the address listed. If you have any other questions that I can answer, you can send me an email at publicrelations.org or rileyb@gpact.org. I will say that I am really busy this week with school and Awareness Week, so if I don't get back to you this weekend, I'm not ignoring you, I promise. So thanks for attending. Hope it was informative. Have a good night.